Hi there! So this video is all about music notation, and not just traditional Western staff notation. I was interested in exploring the similarities between many different kinds of notation from around the world and throughout history. And there are a few reasons why I was interested in this. First of all, I think it's really helpful for musicians who are learning to read sheet music or just engrossed in sheet music every day like me to understand why we represent things the way we do. And when you compare your writing system to other kinds of writing systems, you're better able to see why it is we represent things the way that we do. So basically, the similarities that I found between these different types of notation systems is that we're representing the same things, so there's inevitably going to be similarities. And what we're representing boils down to notes that are high or low, that come in a specific order, and may or may not have durations. So that would be relative to each other. So like this note is going to be longer than the note that comes after it. And then the note that comes after that is going to be longer than that one, that sort of thing. Not every musical tradition is concerned with duration, but a lot of them are. So understanding that those are kind of the three main things we're representing when we represent music on a page is really helpful. And the reason why I wanted to understand that is because it's helpful for musicians who are picking up any kind of notation to understand like what is it that we're trying to represent. If we can always go back to that, I think it gives you a sense of meaning to like, why am I like banging my head on the wall trying to learn and memorize all of these things? It makes it a little bit simpler and gives it a purpose. Secondly, it also helps musicians who actually don't need traditional staff notation, or maybe traditional staff notation isn't the best option for their type of notation. So being able to see other kinds of notation that are out there, because there are so many, then you can get a sense for maybe what works better for you. And then thirdly, from there, if you have that context, that sense of like what came before, you can even create your own kind of notation because you have a context, you have foundation for what has worked for many different cultures, and you can just add to that, you can improve upon it. So those were kind of my three motivating factors for making this video, and I hope it's helpful for all of you. Additionally, this video is part of my new course on how to read sheet music. That's mainly based on traditional staff notation because it's what we use a lot of, especially in the classical tradition, which is what I'm well versed in. So if you're new to reading sheet music or you just want to brush up on your skills, that course is free on my website, and I'll put a link in the description below if you're on YouTube, and if you're on Instagram, you can get to that course through the link in my bio. So anyway, let's dive right into all kinds of notation. Traditional staff notation was born in 9th century Europe as a way to codify the liturgy of the Catholic Church, so that no matter which church you went to, the masses in which you'd sing would be the same. As you can see, it looks a little different than our staff notation that's most common today, but we still have the basic foundation of a staff that's made up of parallel lines here. Notes, or what are called neumes in this case, each of these little symbols, are placed on the staff to tell us what notes come in what order. Up and down tell us what notes are high and what notes are low, and left to right tells us what order they come in, like how you read English, or Latin in this case, from left to right. The main difference between our normal staff today and pneumatic notation is that pneumatic notation doesn't tell you how long to hold notes out. It's a combination of relying on the phrasing of the text and being semi-free to interpret the notes. And often in a church setting, you would have a leader who would sing based on their interpretation, and then the congregation would just repeat that. I do want to mention that 9th century composers did write notation without the staff also. It was just the neumes, which you can see they're a little bit smaller and maybe a little squished and harder to read, but they're still neumes over words. And the concept is still the same, that high and low equal high and low notes, and left to right is still the order. Since things have clearly changed in the last 1,000 years or so, I also want to look at the other major type of notation that led to our staff notation today. This is called mensural notation, and it was important in 13th century music. As you can see, it looks similar to our traditional staff notation today, just with fancier calligraphy. And I also love the importance of having images alongside the text and just having these decorated letters. It's just really beautiful to look at. And the notes are basically drawn the same way. They're notes that are either filled in or left open in the middle, and they have stems that point up and down. There are also some other symbols on this page that you might not be familiar with, and that's a good and normal thing, because it would be very surprising if nothing had changed in 800 years. The concept of the staff is the same across all of these examples, though, in that up and down and left to right are still the same, even today, but the biggest innovation that came with mensural notation was the ability for composers to tell performers how long to hold the notes out in relation to other notes. So in this example, notes that are filled in are shorter than ones that are not, for example. And since it's very much like our notation today, I'm going to dig into that a little bit more later. And before introducing our staff in all its glory, I think it's also important to note that this type of notation is not the only kind. So in 15th century Korea, jianganbo, and pardon my pronunciation, was used to show both pitch and rhythm, where each grid on the page, so each of these bigger blocks that has smaller blocks in it, refers to a unit of time, like a beat. And the composers would fill in each of these boxes depending on what notes would happen in that unit of time. So I don't know exactly precisely how it works, but as you can see, each box has different symbols in it and different spots. So that's just how they would show what's happening in each unit of time. Shakuhachi music, which is a type of flute from ancient China and Japan, often gives just fingering charts as the notation. So in this type of notation, you don't get the amount of time that each note is held out for, but you still get the order of like play this fingering, then this one. And that shakuhachi notation actually falls into a larger category of notation, which is one that might look familiar to you, tablature or tab for short. This type of notation is very popular today with guitarists and is often equated only with pop and other mainstream music today, but it actually has quite a long history as well and refers to any type of notation that gives fingerings instead of notes. So that shakuhachi music from the slide before, and this example for Renaissance lute. So up here we have just the actual notes on staff notation, but on the bottom we have the tablature notation as well, which shows the fingerings and stuff. And because this is from the Renaissance, you can see how long this history is. And I mean, the shakuhachi music was from ancient China and Japan. So that's this type of notation has been around for a very long time as well. In the 20th century in the West, when chants music became popular, composers experimented with other forms of notation like graphic notation, which I find really interesting to look at. Chants music, or aleatoric music, which is the official name for it, is a tradition in which the composer gives general directions but leaves most of the performance up to circumstance. So a composer might say to the strings, all of you play a D major scale, but don't play together or in any sort of meter. So that means each individual string player would be playing different notes at different times, all within the same scale. And then the composer might say to the flutes, hold out an A and a B and slowly change from loud to soft at different times. And then percussion, when it feels right, give us a drum roll and a cymbal crash, then we'll move on to the next section. So the result is a wall of sound that fluctuates differently every time the piece is performed. So how would you give those kinds of specific but also very vague directions to an orchestra? Often, composers would just have an empty staff over which they actually wrote out these directions in language for each instrument. Or they'd use graphic notation where they'd draw pictures of what they wanted to happen, just like in this abstract example from John Cage's Water Walk. Which also uses an interesting set of instruments. I really like the fish in tub instrument. Just getting into what aleatoric music is and the types of instruments that were used and everything is really outside of the scope of this course, but I highly recommend you check out the original recording. It's a really interesting thought experiment really on what music is, like what can we consider music to be. So I'll leave a link in the description below, but I definitely wanted to show this example of notation, and as you can see, like he still has bar numbers and everything. and where you start, and then just the order of events. So it still kind of follows normal traditional staff notation, but we don't have the staff, we just have the order of events. Here's another example. Solitude by Hans Christoph Steiner, that uses color and shape to convey musical information. I really love ones that use color like this because, and also the shapes, because I think you really get a sense of what's happening in each section of music, or at least what kind of feelings you might get, and it's kind of like an exploration into the connection between visual and musical art. So I think like especially like where this giant red spiky part is, I think that might be a different feeling than this section here with the greens and thinner lines that are kind of bouncy. And I'll leave that up to you to listen to and form your own opinions of what each section sounds like and how it relates to the colors that you're seeing here, but I just thought it was really interesting to look at this. And beyond the two types of scores that I showed here, there are so many more different types of graphic scores, and unfortunately, most of them aren't in the public domain yet. Otherwise, I definitely share them with you here. But if you're interested at all in this type of notation or exploring your own kind of notation, I definitely encourage you to do some research and maybe even visit some museums and libraries. You might be more familiar with synesthesia, especially in YouTube videos of pianists where bars fall down from the top of the screen onto the piano keys, and that shows when you're supposed to play those specific notes. You'll also see this type of notation in games like Rock Band or Guitar Hero. And this type of notation, if I might be at liberty to call it that, is pretty much a piano roll on its side, which I thought was really interesting. If you've worked with a digital audio workstation, abbreviated DAW, then you've probably seen a piano roll. The concept is actually very similar to the staff notation I talked about earlier. High and low on the page, or on your screen at least, refer to high and low pitches, and in this case they actually line up with specific pitches on a piano keyboard that we just kind of turn on the side to show that these are the high notes and these are the low notes. And then the left to right is still the order. So as you scroll through, you can see like there's kind of a little box here, which is this viewing screen, but as the song goes, these notes will slowly like hit the keyboard here. So it's sort of like synesthesia on its side, and also lines up with traditional staff notation as well, which is really helpful for anyone who is looking to go in between music production and then like more traditional music composition. So basically, to summarize all of those different types of notation, they're all different, but there are many similarities between them that are based upon the way we conceive of music. Music is pitches that are high, low, and in between that we sing or play in a specific order, and often for a specified amount of time in comparison to the other pitches. I hope this video gave you a little context into where traditional staff notation came from, and also what else is out there as far as music notation goes. If you're interested in digging a little bit deeper into traditional staff notation, then definitely check out the course on how to read sheet music. It's completely free, and you also get some music theory fundamentals in there as well, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to learn more about any of this. And then if you liked this video, I'd really appreciate if you pushed all the buttons, you know the drill.